people. Esther Kumi has come all the way from Africa to speak to us today. She was born and raised in Kenya. She's lived in Korea and been to China, and she worked in Israel for a number of years. And so my tradition is to keep my introductions as short as possible, so please welcome Esther Kumi.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're going to tell us how you ended up here.
Briefly, yes. Joel had asked me if I could prepare pictures also of myself, but unfortunately I didn't get around to doing that, so I'll just give you a brief. I'll tie it into the Baha'i faith. Technically, I'm a third generation Baha'i. My grandmother, on my mother's side, who is American. On my mother's side, I go way back, 1600s, German immigrants. But my grandmother found the Baha'i faith in the 40s. Apparently, Time magazine was doing a series on the different world religions, and she read each one diligently. And she came, the last one they had was about the Baha'i faith, and she read it, and she said, this is what I believe. And so she called the number, and she started going and asking tons of questions. She visited what's called a fireside, and a fireside is where people get together and just ask questions and get your questions answered. And shortly thereafter, my grandfather also became a Baha'i. So my mother was raised a Baha'i. And then my father was in Kenya. He got a scholarship to come to the U.S. to study, kind of like Obama's father. But that's where he met my mom. They met in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. And before I was born, they went back. So I was born in Nairobi, grew up in Nairobi. But my mother passed when I was about 7.5. So being that she was the Baha'i, and being that my father was not a Baha'i, I lost touch with the Baha'i. So I didn't know anything. I didn't go to the Baha'i Center. I didn't know anything about the Baha'is after that point on. And she had put me in a Catholic school. So I grew up, from that point on, I was Catholic. One of my girlfriend's parents thought it would be great. She wanted to make sure that I was safe. So she went ahead and had me baptized in 5th grade. I had my first Holy Communion, and from then on, I was Catholic. Loved it. I loved going and being able to get communion with all my other friends, and went to church regularly. I personally, I love to read the Bible myself, and then when I went to college, my grandparents paid for me to come live with them in Albuquerque. And so I came and lived with them. And they never talked about the Baha'i faith. They never told me anything about the Baha'i faith. And they let me be. And, I like I said, I read the Bible, all the time, prayed every night, loved it. I would have a 30 to 40 minute drive to school, and I would pull my Bible out and read it every day. And, I even had wonderful conversations with people on the bus, and we had, talked about some of the things in the Bible. Loved it. And then one day, one of my good friends from school wrote me a letter, and she had visited a camp. And I don't remember what the camp was. I don't remember what it was, all the stuff that she told me about, but some of the stuff was weird. Some of the stuff she wrote and said, they're talking about, for example, I guess the one thing I do remember, she talked about if you play a CD or a record, those days it was a record, if you play a record backwards, you'll hear the devil speaking. And I was like, what is all this? What are you talking about? And so I had lots of questions over the years, but just never had anybody to really talk to. So I wrote to one of the nuns that I knew at school, because I went to Catholic school, and wrote her a 14-page letter. At this time, if you ask me what I asked her, I don't remember. But 14 pages must have been important, 6 months later, I got a little note from her saying, I'll pray for you. And that was her answer. Well, I'm sure she did pray for me. But that was the beginning of my search and my starting to look into what are the real answers to my questions. And I started talking to a lot of people. I started asking a lot of questions. And of course, my grandparents were there, so I was able to start asking them questions. And my grandmother started answering my questions. But I still wasn't fully investigating the Baha'i faith. I visited a mosque. I went to a mosque service, talked to some of my Muslim friends, and but there was still something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I knew there was something I was looking for. And my Muslim friends wanted me to keep going to the mosque with them. And finally I told them no. And they said, why not? I said, because I'm a Baha'i. And they said, what's that? I said, I don't know. But when I figure it out, I'll let you know. So pretty soon thereafter, I started learning and started reading more about the Baha'i faith. And then eventually I decided to become a Baha'i. So that's a little bit about me. That was, oh my gosh, how many years ago? That was in 1989. That's a while back. So, and my journey went on from there. I was in New Mexico at the time. Several years later, I went to South Korea. I was in South Korea for about 2.5 years. And I was teaching English at some of the language schools there. And then I went and served at the Baha'u'llah Center. And I'll show you pictures of the Baha'u'llah Center during the presentation. And served there for about 6.5 years. That's where I met my husband. My oldest daughter was born there, and we moved here in 2003. And I have a second daughter who was born in 2009. And we live in Pensacola right now. So.
Where did you meet your husband then?
We met in Israel, at the Baha'u'llah Center. Okay. He's from Ghana. He's from West Africa. I'm from East Africa. He's from West Africa. So I wish I did get the time to put pictures together, but unfortunately I didn't. So, okay. Baha'i faith. One thing I also wanted to say before I get too deep into this is my first foray into PowerPoint presentations. It's my first delving into it, so if some of it looks amateurish, I'm guilty as charged. So.
Better than I could do.
But I will, if I say that I created it all from scratch, I'd be lying. So I took bits and pieces from other presentations and put it together. So, what is the Baha'i faith? The Baha'i faith is a world religion whose purpose is to unite all the races and peoples in one universal cause and one common faith. Baha'is are the followers of Baha'u'llah, who they believe is the promised one of all ages. I'm sure a lot of you know that a lot of the traditions talk about a time when humanity will live in peace and prosperity. Baha'is believe that that promised day has come and that Baha'u'llah is the promised one. Baha'u'llah in one of his writings says that which the Lord hath ordained as the sovereign remedy and the mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith. Okay, a lot of people are talking about how to fix the ills of the world, and we believe through Baha'u'llah, he's telling us how to do it. Okay. One of the teachings that I'm going to talk about Baha'u'llah, that Baha'u'llah teaches us, is about God and our relationship with him. Baha'u'llah tells us that God is unknowable. He's unknowable in his essence. For example, in this picture, you see a picture of a carpenter. I used to love Star Trek. There's a gentleman in Star Trek, Data. Data was a machine. He was created. But one of the things that he always struggled with was how to understand man, how to understand his maker, the person that made him. And no matter how perfect our picture becomes, no matter how perfect this table becomes that the carpenter makes, or there's that thing that is created will never comprehend the essence of the thing that creates it. So, a painting. Can a painting truly understand the painter? So no matter how much we try, we will never truly comprehend that which is greater than us. Baha'u'llah tells us that God is the creator of all things. He created the trees, all the universe, the planets, everything around us. And the reason why he created us, Baha'u'llah tells us, is he created us out of love. In one of his writings, he says that, "O Son of Man, I loved thy creation. I loved thy creation, hence I created thee. Wherefore do thou love me, that I may name thy name and fill thy soul with the spirit of life." Now, Baha'u'llah tells us that God has created an eternal covenant with us. Okay? Now, even though we can never understand him, he obviously understands us, and he has promised us that his love will flow to us through this covenant that he's created with us. And he says, he promises that he will never leave us alone. I'm assuming a lot of you have a Christian background. I mean, he spoke to Abraham and he promised him that he would always guide and he would always protect. So he never leaves us alone and without guidance. And Baha'u'llah tells us that his guidance is revealed to us through the manifestations of God. And I'll get to this word manifestation in a little bit. The word manifest obviously means to show something that was once hidden. Okay? But before I do that, one of the analogies that Baha'u'llah uses to explain this relationship to God is he uses the sun in relation to the earth. Now, a lot of times when people talk about God, they talk about religion, they talk about understanding God, they pretend that they can control it, they can understand it and get a handle on it. Much like this, I saw this picture, I loved it. Because it's almost like saying, "Oh, yeah, I can explain God. Here you go. I can manipulate into what I want. Here you go." But in reality, it's more like this. If the sun itself were to come to the earth, I mean, what would happen? I mean, it's impossible. If we were to try to go to the sun, we would be obliterated. The direct interaction, the direct connection, direct interaction with God is near impossible. However, our planet Earth depends on our existence on the sun. Without the sun, nothing on this planet would exist the way it does. From the plants, beautiful flowers, like you see these seedlings, and I love these images when I saw them, because it's just showing everything. Even the wind depends on hot and cold and everything moving around. Everything on our planet depends on the sun. But Baha'u'llah tells us that manifestations of God reveal the word and the will of God. Okay, the word and the will of God is hidden, but the manifestations of God reveal that to us. He says that the manifestations of God are like perfect mirrors. If you look at a mirror, and it's a perfect mirror, and you look at the sun, you'll see it perfectly reflected. So they reflect God's word and his will perfectly to us. They reflect the light of God in all its splendor. And essentially, to listen to these manifestations of God is to respond to the call of God himself. Again, like I said, while God is beyond our reach, these perfect beings come to us from time to time. They live among us. They give us guidance, and they fill us with the energy we need to progress materially and spiritually. Materially and spiritually. And here are some of the, not all, but not in, it's not in a perfect timeline, but just to give you an idea of some of the previous manifestations that Baha'u'llah has mentioned. And of course, today we have not only Baha'u'llah, but we have the Bab, and I'll get it and I'll explain about both of them. I'll talk about both of them. later in the presentation. Now, if you think about the plight of humanity today, you'll most certainly agree with me that, it seems like it's time for, for God to help us out again. But Baha'u'llah says that there's a great promise in this day. Okay? He says that this is the day in which God's most excellent favors have been poured out upon men. The day in which His most mighty grace hath been infused into all created things. It is incumbent upon all the peoples of the world to reconcile their differences, and with perfect unity and peace abide beneath the shadow of the tree of His care and loving kindness. I mean, even if you think about physically, think about the changes that have happened in the last couple hundred years. Transportation, one of them, is the one I always like to think about. How many thousands of years do we ride horse and buggies? And within the span of a couple hundred years, we're driving vehicles everywhere. We're flying to the moon. Just as an example. His most mighty grace hath been infused into all created things. But then He gives us a challenge. He says we need to reconcile our differences. I struggled with this word for a long time. What does it mean to reconcile? But and what I loved about Joel asking me to do this is a lot of times the teacher learns more than the students. And in the process of preparing this, I began to understand what this reconcile means. That it's essentially to understand that there is no difference. Races, for example. I love that my mother was white and my father was black, because I'm proof that there is no difference, because I exist. If we were completely, incompatible, I wouldn't exist. Okay? So this reconciling is just accepting and admitting and realizing that there is no difference. Unity has to come first before peace. We always want to fix everything else before unity, but He tells us, reconcile it first. Come to terms with it first. So, that being said, next thing I'm going to talk about is the aim of the Baha'i faith. The aim of the Baha'i faith, if you haven't figured out from all the previous already, is to unify humanity. Baha'u'llah tells us that we are like, humanity, we are like the leaves of one branch and the fruits of one tree. Although we differ from one another physically and emotionally, we have different talents and capacities, however, we all spring from the same root. We all belong to the same human family. Baha'u'llah tells us that humanity is like a vast garden in which grow side by side flowers of every form, color, perfume. And it's the charm and beauty of this garden is the diversity itself. If everything was the same color and hue, it would be monotonous and boring. But this great diversity creates this charm and beauty. Baha'u'llah tells us that we should not allow the differences that exist among us in our physical characteristics, our temperaments, that's a hard one, our backgrounds, our thoughts, our opinions, that's another hard one, to give rise to conflict and strife. This picture was taken at the Baha'i World Center where I served. And one of the things I loved about serving there is we had about 600 to 800 people from all over the world. And in fact, whenever I see this picture, I know a lot of these people by name. We've had dinner together. We've spent time together. And whereas some people are from Africa, like she's from Uganda, some people are from Eastern Europe, some people are from India, he's from Papua New Guinea. We all spent time, we all interacted, learned about each other and spent time together. This is the beautiful garden of humanity. And, anyone who decides to become a Baha'i participates in that process of helping humanity build this oneness, this unity. Baha'u'llah tells us that we should strive to bring our thoughts and actions in line with the belief in the oneness of humanity. Abdu'l-Baha, and I'll get into him, he says, when a thought of war comes, we should oppose it by a stronger thought of peace. In fact, there's a story a friend of mine told me once, Cambodia. I don't know how much of you know about this history in Cambodia. For many years, a lot of war. And at one point, there was peace for just a short period, but people were, you grow up in war, that's all you know, that's all you think. And some Baha'i friends got together and they decided to go around the country and just talk to people about peace, the possibility of peace. And that war never happened. But it's just a demonstration of this issue of a thought. A thought. It's easy to get mad at people and get angry and stay angry. But if you oppose it with a stronger thought of peace, what could happen? Abdu'l-Baha also tells us that a thought of hatred must be destroyed by a more powerful thought of love. Oops. We should do everything possible, leave no stone unturned to overcome prejudices of race, color, nationality, culture, religion, and sex, which are among the greatest obstacles to building a better world. I mean, if you think about most of the world wars we have, a lot of it is you can pinpoint one of these things. The Holocaust, is race. The other one with race was in Rwanda. That was horrible, genocide in Rwanda. Color for many years, in a lot of countries. Nationality, we want our nation versus their nation, Culture, it's just constant. Abdu'l-Baha tells us that Baha'u'llah has drawn the circle of unity. He has made a design for the uniting of all the peoples and for the gathering of them under the shelter of the tent of universal unity. He says this is the work of the divine bounty. This is our work today. This is the work that God is giving us today. This is the work of divine bounty. And we must all strive with heart and soul until we have the reality of unity in our midst. And as we work, so will strength be given unto us. Now I'm going to talk about Baha'u'llah. Now, up to this point, does anyone have any questions or comments, or want me to keep going? Keep going? Okay. Okay. Baha'u'llah. Now get into who was he? Baha'u'llah was born in 1817 in Tehran, in the capital of Iran. So 1817, that's what? Is it not even 200 years ago? From his early childhood, he showed signs of greatness. I mean, some of you remember the stories of Christ when he was 12 years old, talking to his parents, left, and where was he? Had to run back to go get him because he said, "I'm at the house of my Lord." He was busy engaged in what he loved to do. He with all the great thinkers of the time. Baha'u'llah received some instruction at home, but he did not attend school, for he was endowed with innate knowledge from God. Baha'u'llah came from a noble family. And because he was from a noble family, when he was a young man, he was offered a high position in the court of the king, but he refused it. Instead, he dedicated his time to helping the oppressed, the sick, and the poor. And at the same time, he also dedicated himself to championing the cause of justice. Now, Baha'u'llah suffered a lot, but he also had a lot of great influence. And I'll talk about both aspects. But first, I'm going to talk about his suffering. Baha'u'llah's sufferings began the moment he arose to proclaim the cause of God. If you look at those names that I showed below, you know, the same thing happened to them. As soon as they started proclaiming, they started their suffering. Baha'u'llah lived a life of exile, imprisonment, and persecution. When he was first imprisoned, he was put in chains in a dark and dismal dungeon in Tehran. This picture has an X that shows this Tehran in those days. But this image shows you these. I don't know if you can see it, but these are this is the ground level, and underground you have the 3 levels, and no light penetrated that area. And heavy chains around his neck. He couldn't lift his head up, and he bore the marks of the chains for the rest of his life. Baha'u'llah was exiled 4 times from land to land. So from Tehran, he was exiled. They tried to get rid of him out of Iran because his influence was increasing. Sent him to Baghdad. He was there for a while. But more people kept believing in him. So the Iranian government said, oh, he's too close. Or I guess the Persian said, he's too close, send him further. So they sent him further into the Ottoman Empire. And then he was exiled again, and finally he was exiled to Akka. They said Akka was so bad that it was a prison city. They said that Akka was so bad a bird would fly over in the air and would fall dead. The air was so bad. The clean water was non-existent. And they said, send him to Akka. He will die in Akka. He'll out of our hands.
But when he was exiled to all these areas, was he kept in prison, or was he a free man in these different areas?
Before he was exiled out of Tehran, he was in that dungeon in Tehran. But in each place, I think he was either under house arrest but for a brief period. But then he was allowed to move around. It was only when he was in Akka that he was imprisoned for, oh my gosh, I want to say 4 years in a prison, and then he was under house arrest for another 9 years. And he says that in one of his tablets, he talks about how he didn't see verdure for 9 years. He didn't see greenery for 9 years. And I'll show you one of the pictures of the prison where he was imprisoned. And like I said, no matter where they sent him, his influence kept growing. This is the prison that he was imprisoned in. This is the window to the room in which he was imprisoned in. This is in Akka. This is in Israel.
What did he do wrong that he was in prison?
He was proclaiming that now again, like I talked about, he said that he was the promised one. And the Muslims believe I'm sure, I watched one of the presentations, there was a Shia Muslim that was here earlier. They believe that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. And they've interpreted seal to mean the last prophet. And so being that they didn't expect another manifestation to come, they considered the Baha'is heretics. They considered him heretic. But because a lot of people were attracted to him and were following him, it shook up the, the government, and they were, they wanted to get him away as far away as possible.
How did he continue to influence people when he was in prison?
It's a very good.
Him in the dungeon?
It's a lot of little stories here and there, but the next quote will go. Baha'u'llah will explain something. We'll go more into that, into your question, but let's go into this one. He talks to his believers. He says, remember his days during remember his days during our days, and his distress and banishment in this remote prison. And he tells us to be so steadfast in his love that their hearts shall not waver, even if the swords of the enemies rain blows upon us, and the heavens and the earth arise against us. Baha'u'llah says, the ancient beauty hath consented to be bound with chains, so that mankind can be freed, released from its bondage, and hath accepted to be made a prisoner within this most mighty stronghold, that the whole world may attain unto true liberty. He hath drained to its dregs the cup of sorrow, that all the peoples of the earth may attain unto abiding joy, and be filled with gladness. This is of the mercy of your Lord, the compassionate, the most merciful. We have accepted to be abased, O believers, in the unity of God, that ye may be exalted, and have suffered manifold afflictions, that ye might prosper and flourish. He who hath come to build anew the whole world, behold how they that have joined partners with God have forced him to dwell within those most desolate of cities. I wanted to answer your question by talking about this. He hath accepted to be made a prisoner. If you think about Christ and his suffering, could Christ have gotten himself off the cross? He could have. I mean, he was the Son of God. He could have done whatever he wanted. But he accepted to do that for us. And the same thing Baha'u'llah did. Accepted. So in some places he was strictly in prison, but because God wanted his cause to grow, it wasn't always as severe. And there's stories about that people would walk all the way from Iran, walk for 6 months, all the way to come see him. And some people would only get a little glimpse of his handkerchief waving out the window. But some people would walk right past the guards, and the guards wouldn't even see them. So there's stories like that. But but it's this issue of he is accepted because he wants to show us that even when we are being persecuted, it's okay. Our world is not this world. Our world is beyond this world. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes.
Who's the ancient beauty? Is that referring to Baha'u'llah?
That's my understanding, is that he's referring to himself. But he could also be referring, Baha'u'llah in one of his tablets explains that, remember that name of all the manifestations of God? In essence, that, also in the Bible it talks about, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. The Word was God. And we believe that Christ was the Word come into flesh. And he talked about how he would return. Baha'u'llah explains that there's two passages in the Bible where Christ says that there will be one who will come after me who will explain things that I can't explain to you now. And he also says he will return. He says these two mean the same thing. And Baha'u'llah explains that the Word of God is what returns time and time again. So each one of those manifestations was the Word re-revealed. But because of the fact that this world is a world of time and space, spiritually they are identical because they do the same thing. They reveal the Word and the will of God. But physically they're different, and they came at a different time, and they came to a different people. So physically, some of the things changed. Some of the laws changed. Like Christ changed the law of the Sabbath, and angered a lot of the scribes and the Pharisees. And Baha'u'llah changed some of the laws as well.
Because Baha'u'llah is not ancient. That's what makes me ask the question.
Exactly. It's a very good question. But its root is the same root as in the beginning was the Word. Yes?
Well, would you say then that Baha'u'llah
Yes.
and all the rest of the entities that were down below there, that they're all somewhat messiahs, that it's a progression, that they're each bringing the Word of God back?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But the word Messiah it's a station attributable to Christ. It was a promise that to the Jews that this would be their Messiah. Christ was our Savior. Okay, Christ fulfilled the prophecy of that time, but now Baha'u'llah has a new mission he has to fulfill. Yes.
So you don't believe that Jesus is the only begotten Son of God?
Oh, I do. I do believe it.
How can you reconcile that to Baha'u'llah? If Christ was the only begotten Son.
Because that was his station. That was Christ's station. Now, the Word, Christ also talked about that he would come again.
Yeah.
And that Baha'u'llah is, in no uncertain terms, the return of Christ. So it's not that it's a different Word of God that's come. It's the same Word, but manifesting differently. Okay? So let me keep going. Okay, and talk about his influence. Okay, every effort was made by two powerful courts. In those days, it was the King of Iran and the Ottoman Empire, to oppose Baha'u'llah and his teachings. But light of truth is very interesting. And it's interesting to use the word light of truth. When whatever water is poured to try to drown it turns into oil, and the light of truth burns more intensely. The more you try to put out truth, the more it grows. The farther the authorities banished him, the greater the number of people who were attracted to his teachings and recognized his power and majesty. And in spite of the constant persecution, Baha'u'llah continued to reveal the Word of God for more than 40 years. And he brought so much love and spiritual energy into this world that the final victory of his cause is certain. This is just a sprinkling of some of his writings. A lot of them have not even been translated into English. He wrote tablets and books and letters. Baha'u'llah passed away in 1892, and these are two images of his shrine. This is a front view, and this is an aerial view. This view is taken from right around here. Now, several years before Baha'u'llah had declared his mission, God had sent a special messenger to announce his coming. Kind of like John the Baptist had been sent before Christ. In his name, he took on the name of the Bab. The Bab means gate. This is an Arabic word that means gate. He came to announce the coming of Baha'u'llah. He came to announce the dawn of a new era in human existence. He essentially came to announce the dawn of the promised day of God. For 6 years, the Bab taught ceaselessly that the appearance of a new manifestation of God was near, and he prepared the way for his coming. He called upon the people to purify their hearts from earthly vanities so they would recognize him. Okay? I mean, how many people walked and met Christ and never recognized him? This is a prerequisite to purify. Thousands upon thousands of people accepted the message of the Bab and began to follow his teachings. But the government of Iran and the powerful clergy ruled over the masses rose against him. His followers were persecuted and large numbers, tens of thousands, were put to death. This is a mild picture. There's some of the stories told about that time are very graphic, and I'm sparing you all. In fact, today, Baha'is are still in Iran, are still being persecuted. They're being denied education. They're being denied work. They're being denied ownership of homes. But right now, there's a website called Education Under Fire, if you're interested in learning more about what's happening right now.
So are they often leaving Iran?
Right now, I don't think they're leaving Iran. In 79, I think around that after, I think a lot of Baha'is left, but right now I don't think they're leaving. But, yeah. The Bab himself, at the age of 31, was martyred. This is the square in Tabriz where he was executed. He was martyred by a regiment of soldiers. He was suspended at that square, and they opened fire on him. I wanted to share two prayers of the Bab so you could get a feel for the Bab's word. And this is one of them. He says, "Is there any remover of difficulties save God? Say, praise be God, he is God. All are his servants, and all abide by his bidding." In fact, I have prepared some of the quotes that you see through here. I've prepared a handout, and this is on the second page. Yes.
This has carried on since he died in 1892.
Baha'u'llah carried on after him.
Yeah, but what's Baha'i?
That I'll get into that. That's part of the.
This is amazingly similar to John the Baptist, also, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
The way he was killed.
Right. Right. Are there enough? Okay, good. I was actually thinking maybe to go ahead and turn to the second page. Now this is a prayer that a lot of Baha'is, especially children, learn. And it's a very short prayer. And I was hoping we could spend maybe a minute or two and just maybe see if you could memorize it. I guess I'll keep going. The next one is also on that handout. He says, to God sufficeth all things above all things, and nothing in the heavens or in the earth but God sufficeth. Verily, he is in himself the knower, the sustainer, the omnipotent. But I'll keep going. Now, following the Bab's martyrdom, his remains were recovered by his followers and hidden. And they were taken from place to place. And finally, they were transferred to Mount Carmel. This is in Haifa, Israel. And they were interred in beneath this. And then this was built around it. Now, Israel is now the spiritual and the administrative world center of the Baha'i faith. Spiritual because you have both the shrines of Baha'u'llah and the Bab there. This is shrine of Baha'u'llah, another picture. This is another angle. And that's another angle of the shrine of the Bab. And administrative because that's the seat of the Universal House of Justice. This Universal House of Justice is the supreme body that oversees the affairs of the Baha'is right now. So partly an answer to your question. But there's a longer story. And these are some more pictures. I said earlier, I served in Haifa, Israel for 6.5 years. And I visited at least once a week. Loved it. Beautiful gardens. Very peaceful. And if I have any home, that's my home. And this is another image of this is on Mount Carmel in Haifa. And this is the Ark. They call this the Ark. And that's the seat where the Universal House of Justice meets. And these are the terraces behind the Shrine of the Bab. The Shrine of Bab is right here. And these are some of the other buildings with the gardens. I used to live in one of these apartments right here. And so from my window, I could see through here and could see the shrine and the Bay of Haifa. It was absolutely gorgeous.
What goes on at the Universal House of Justice?
They meet regularly and talk about the affairs of the Baha'is all over the world. They guide the growth of the Baha'i faith through the world. They address any issues. But these are a lot of. This is an archives building. It's historical relics. This is it's called the Center for the Study of the Texts, and so a lot of the historical underground. They build up, so they built down, and so there's a lot of historical documents and artifacts kept up under in here. And this is the international the counselors' offices in there. And again, more floors underneath with cafeterias and all sorts of other stuff under there. I didn't actually work on the mountain. I worked at a building off somewhere else. But we would go to have lunch in there. Yes.
Are those documents backed up somewhere else?
When I say the original documents, because that Baha'u'llah wrote with reed pens, and so that's part of the work that goes on, is to archive those and make them available, but yet maintain them so they can be around for the next 1,000 or more years.
I'm just thinking of how incendiary things are in the Middle East, and how nice it would be to have other copies elsewhere.
I don't know the details because I didn't work in those departments, so I don't know the details of how they do that. But I'm sure because we have national centers all around the world. I'm sure there's some thought to that. There's some more pictures. Okay, now directly to your question. After the passing of the manifestation.
And by the manifestation, you mean
Baha'u'llah, yes. But generally, after the passing of each manifestation, there would be disagreement as who would lead and guide the believers and how. The question was sometimes motivated by ambitious individuals, but sometimes, sincere believers would disagree amongst themselves about what exactly the manifestation meant. You know, Christ said, I will build my church on this rock. But what did he mean by that?
Peter.
He meant Peter. But did he explain how the church was to be built? You know, there's not a lot that's available as to that. And so a lot of disagreements happen. And because these questions were never clearly resolved, his followers would have disputes among themselves and inevitably split into sects. And this is, I found this on the internet. It is one picture, but this is Christianity as an example. You know, at different points, you know, disagreement about the direction of the church and, you know, the different splits. One body.
Interesting picture, really.
Of course, the Orthodox would have that as a baseline.
Right. Now, in the Baha'i faith, we have Abdu'l-Baha, who is at the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant. I mentioned the eternal covenant before. Baha'is call this the lesser covenant. But the idea most central to our lives as Baha'is is that we have entered into a covenant with Baha'u'llah. And that covenant, Baha'u'llah has protected his faith against division. Okay, through this power of the covenant. What he did was, before he passed away, he wrote a will. And in that will, he clearly stated that the Baha'is were to turn to Abdu'l-Baha. So there's no ambiguity. It was in his writing, and he stated exactly how we were to do it.
Question.
Yes?
How did Baha'u'llah die?
He passed away in his sleep.
So there wasn't any violence?
No. And that was also around the time when the Ottoman Empire was falling apart. So, you know, they finally did allow him out of the prison, and so he did end up living in you know, beautiful gardens. He got to see Virgia before he passed. So, but Abdu'l-Baha is Baha'u'llah's eldest son, and he was born coincidentally in 1844, on the very same night that the Bab himself declared his mission to his first believer. Abdu'l-Baha was raised by Baha'u'llah, and Abdu'l-Baha recognized his father's station even as a young boy. And he shared his father's sufferings. He basically went with Baha'u'llah everywhere he went throughout his whole suffering.
Who was his mother?
I don't have a picture of her, but her name was Asiya Khanum. But she also suffered with them too. He lived on this earth for 77 years and passed away in November 1921. And even though his life was filled with affliction, to everyone who entered his presence, Abdu'l-Baha brought us the greatest joy and happiness. Story after story, everybody who meets Abdu'l-Baha, it doesn't matter what background they are. They just talk about how loved they felt. Baha'u'llah gave responsibility of the Baha'i community to Abdu'l-Baha. Abdu'l-Baha was the sole interpreter. No other Baha'i is allowed to interpret the writings, the Baha'i writings. And throughout his life, after the passing of Baha'u'llah, he labored day and night to spread the Baha'i faith through the East and the West. He wrote thousands of tablets to individuals and groups everywhere and clarified his father's teachings. Any dispute anyone had, they could write to him and he would explain it. So his interpretations now, these are only 2 books, but there's many, are now an essential part of the writings of the Baha'i faith. We see Abdu'l-Baha as the perfect example. And we as Baha'is remember that as a part of our promise to Baha'u'llah, we are to love one another. And in Abdu'l-Baha, we see the perfect example of that. In fact, I wanted to add this photo here. This is a picture of a couple. who in exactly 100 years ago, 1912, 101 years ago, Abdu'l-Baha encouraged them to get married. Now, imagine them having to travel in the South in that day. I mean, it was, they could have been killed for doing that. But, he encouraged them, and he talked about when the races intermarry, that then you will see, the oneness of humanity being established. But he loved them both. They both loved Abdu'l-Baha very much. And so they did what he asked. By focusing on Abdu'l-Baha, we remember that we must uphold justice, that we must be generous, that we must overlook the faults of others. And from his example, we learn justice, generosity, forgiveness. By focusing on Abdu'l-Baha as the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant, the Baha'is remain united in our efforts to live a Baha'i life and to create a new civilization.
Is that under the Eiffel Tower?
Yes, that's correct. He traveled in Europe and in America, actually 100 years ago, last year. He was in the United States and Canada. Abdu'l-Baha reminds us of our covenant with Baha'u'llah, and that we will not allow the unity of his followers to be broken. So we will labor until the oneness of humanity is firmly established because of Abdu'l-Baha and his example and his interpretations. Now, after he passed away, before he passed away, he also wrote a will. And he named his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, as the guardian of the Baha'i faith. And he became, at that point, the authorized interpreter, and the center to which the Baha'is had to turn. And for 36 years, he continued the work of his grandfather, further clarifying the words of the manifestation and firmly establishing the Baha'i faith in all parts of the world. So the Baha'i faith, through his efforts, spread throughout the entire world. Now, after 5 years after the passing of the guardian, in 1963, the Baha'is of the world elected the Universal House of Justice. Now, this election was envisioned by Baha'u'llah and clearly described by Abdu'l-Baha and the guardian.
The guardian being Shoghi Effendi.
Shoghi Effendi, that's correct. That's correct. So it wasn't some arbitrary thing that Baha'is came up with. It's clearly described in the Baha'i writings how to do it and when to do it. And the Universal House of Justice, supreme institution of the faith, as I've already said before, to which the Baha'is of the world now turn. The next aspect of the Baha'i faith I want to talk about is the laws. Now, every religion, the very most important aspect is the laws which the manifestation brings to humanity, to guide it, okay, and keep it on the right path. Some of the laws and commandments are eternal. Like, I don't think I see a religion that says thou shalt kill. Some of them are eternal. And others change as humanity progresses and evolves. And one of the examples is Christ changed the Sabbath. He changed the law of divorce, just to name a couple. Moses said an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And Christ said, give the left cheek, give the right cheek. So some of the laws change as humanity, The Jews didn't want to teach to the Gentiles, but Christ's message was about the Gentiles. Go send it out to the Gentiles. Go talk to them. Baha'u'llah explains to us that we should not think of laws as a series of do's and don'ts. It's easy to think of it as don't do this, do that, don't do that, don't do that, or do this. Baha'u'llah tells us that the laws and commandments of God are the lamps of his loving providence among his servants and the keys of his mercy for his creatures. And he tells us not to observe out of fear. I was Catholic, went to to confession a lot, and I understand fear. But he tells us not to do it for fear. Do it out of love. One example to describe what Baha'u'llah is trying to explain is physically, we need food to sustain us, right? If you don't eat, you can only survive a certain amount of days, maybe 14 days, maybe. But if, soon you're not going to live 60 years. You're going to die. So you could say that eating every day is a law of physical existence that you have to obey. So, like our body, our soul needs constant nourishment. So Baha'u'llah tells us that prayer provides us with the nourishment for our spiritual growth. Just as we eat every day, we need to pray every day. And this is one of Baha'u'llah's prayers. In fact, this is a prayer that Baha'is recite daily. It's one of 3 prayers, actually I should say that. One of 3 prayers that we can choose to recite daily. And I have it on the handout. It's on the handout there.
And which are the other 2?
Pardon?
Are there 3 that can be recited?
Yes.
Are they all 3?
No, unfortunately, I did not include the other 3. But you can access it online. There's I'll have to think of the website. It'll come to me. It'll come to me, or I'll find it at the end of the class that you can access a lot of the major Baha'i writings, including the Baha'i prayers.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And in this one, he says, I bear witness, O my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. Talking about our purpose. We were created to know him and to worship him. I testify this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might, to my poverty and to thy wealth. There is none other God but thee, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. Another law that we're asked, one of the things that we're asked not to do is not to backbite. And this, I saw this picture, loved it. So the point of this picture, they're talking about this duck. Feathers are so dull. She has a big bottom.
Oh, that's not a real girl.
So one of the greatest enemies to unity, remember the aim of the Baha'i faith is to unify humanity. So one of the greatest enemies to unity is backbiting. But unfortunately, it's become established practice, and most of humanity, loves to talk about other people's faults. And the more you talk about other people's faults, the greater they become. It used to be, it was just, that's not a real bill. Oh, and she bought it at this such a place. Oh, and it gets bigger and bigger. Abdu'l-Baha tells us we have to do the opposite. He tells us that if you see 10 good qualities and 1 fault, ignore the 1 fault and focus on the 10. And then on the flip side, if you see 10 bad qualities but 1 good one, focus on the 1. In fact, Abdu'l-Baha shares a story about Christ himself, that Christ and his disciples were walking by this dog that was dead on the side of the road and was putrefying. And the disciples were, oh, that's disgusting. Oh, talking about, oh, look at that, mangled and, all this stuff. And Christ looked and said, oh, he's got beautiful teeth. To explain this exact point, that we should look at the 1 good, find the good. Find the good and focus on the good. To that point, Baha'u'llah, in one of his hidden words, calls us his companions, companion to his throne. He says, hear no evil and see no evil. Abase not thyself, neither sigh and weep. Speak no evil, that thou mayest not hear it spoken unto thee. And magnify not the faults of others, that thine own faults may not appear great. I love this because this is the consequence of focusing on other people's faults. Your own faults appear greater. And wish not the abasement of anyone, that thine own abasement be not exposed. Live then the days of thy life that are less than a fleeting moment, with thy mind stainless, thy heart unsullied, thy thoughts pure, and thy nature sanctified, so that free and content thou mayest put away this mortal frame and repair unto the mystic paradise and abide in the eternal kingdom forevermore. And I have that quote on the handout. So another law that Baha'u'llah presented is about alcohol and substance abuse. Baha'u'llah prohibits it. And it may seem self-explanatory, but drinking of alcohol, I mean, this is one of the greatest social ills that we have today. Yes?
He has beautiful underpants.
There you go. The positive.
Nice bowling ball.
There you go. But alcoholism is one of the most common causes of violence and destroys healthy family life. And unfortunately, it makes people capable of behaving in ways that are, extremely shameful, unfortunately. So again, goes back to, it's not a law, just don't do this. It's for our own good. Baha'u'llah calls us noble. He says, O son of spirit, I created thee rich. Why dost thou bring thyself down to poverty? Noble I made thee. Wherewith dost thou abase thyself? Out of the essence of knowledge I gave thee being. Out of the essence of knowledge we came to exist. Why seekest thou enlightenment from anyone beside me? Out of the clay of love I molded thee. How dost thou busy thyself with another? Turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsisting. Another injunction that we're asked is that we need to train our children. And we need to teach them in the school of virtue and perfection. We must not be lax in this matter. Okay? And Abdullah even goes so far as to say, if a babe did not live at all, were better than to let it grow up ignorant. Pardon? I
was just talking to myself. I said that's dangerous.
Yes. Well, I mean, don't want to go around killing babies, but I don't think that's what he's talking about. But,
I hope not.
No, that's not what he's talking about. But not training our children in the school of virtue and perfection would be an omission and a sin. And then he also talks about the education of all children. There was a time when only boys were taught. And Abdul Baha'i is telling us we must strive to educate both sexes, male and female, girls like boys. And he says the ignorance of both, whether male or female, is blameworthy. And negligence is reprovable.
That's not very popular in Muslim nations right now.
Right, exactly. But even we in the West have, I say we, being from Kenya, we've struggled with this. It's only in the last, 50, 60, 70 years that even the women have been trained.
That last sentence is interesting. Are they who know
And they,
who do not know equal?
exactly.
Well, I don't want people standing in a voting line with me who are ignorant of politics and issues and things like that. No, I don't think they are equal. But
Yeah. No, it's important for everyone to get trained. So finally, I'm coming to the conclusion. Any questions before I continue? Okay. Baha'i faith, as I'm sure you've already surmised, is a very organized religion, not just a collection of nice ideas. His aim is nothing less than the unification of the entire human race. The work of the Baha'is is the building of a world civilization. And there are 3 participants in this work, each with a very important role: the individual, the community, and the institutions. The individual has their duties to remain firm in the covenant, we talked about, to strive daily to bring our lives in line with Baha'u'llah's teachings, because it's a daily struggle. It's not something you automatically, I wish it were, but it's not. To serve humanity, to be always conscious of the fact that life does not end with death, and that one's relationship with God is eternal. And so a little bit about this last statement about after death our souls become free and continue to progress towards God for all eternity. And Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha explained that our lives here are very much like the life of an infant in the womb of its mother. Just as this infant is developing hands and feet and heart and lungs. I mean, what does a baby in the womb need lungs for? You know, what does a baby in the womb need fingers for? Or, you know, well, I guess they stuck a finger, but eyes, you know. A baby in the womb doesn't need all those things. Legs, I mean, after a certain point, the baby's scrunched up. What do you need legs for? To kick them off? So, in this world, we're developing spiritual faculties to prepare us for the next world. But it doesn't just happen by just thinking about it. We must work. We must serve our fellow human beings. And we must share the knowledge that we gain. So this is our responsibility as individuals. The community. Human beings are not created to exist alone. We live in communities and we must work together to build a new civilization. The community closest to us is the local one. So Baha'is have their own local community that they work within. And it's in the local community where we learn. And this is a key word, learn. It's not, it doesn't come inherently. We're learning to cooperate with one another, to grow together and become united. And as we also are part of the larger community, the national community and the worldwide Baha'i community, which is constantly expanding and attracting people from every religious background, race, and nationality. Then the third participant is institutions. In the past, the manifestations of God have not said much about how their followers should organize themselves. And the people have had to discover how to do this by themselves. But Baha'u'llah has brought his own administrative order. He has told us what institutions we must create, how they should function, and how humanity should be governed. In the Baha'i faith, there are no priests or clergy. We have local spiritual assemblies, which consist of 9 individuals from within the locality. And they are elected annually in a prayerful atmosphere by secret ballot by all adult believers in the community. And they guide the affairs of the community within that locality. And they watch over the well-beings of the individual believers. Then we have national spiritual assemblies, and they are also elected annually. And they guide the affairs of the national community. And then you have the Universal House of Justice as a supreme institution of the faith, and they're elected every 5 years, and they guide the affairs of the worldwide Baha'i community. So the work of a Baha'i through participating in this work, we learn how human affairs are to be administered and how a new order can be established in society. An order which is to be known as the world order of Baha'u'llah. Now, this closing prayer is actually, and it's the last item. Can somebody offer to read that for us? Go ahead.
No.
It's the very last one.
O God, refresh and gladden my spirit, purify my heart, illumine my powers. I lay all my affairs in thy hand. Thou art my guide and my refuge. I will no longer be sorrowful and grieved. I will be a happy and joyful being. O God, I will no longer be full of anxiety, nor will I let trouble harass me. I will not dwell on the unpleasant things of life. O God, thou art more friend to me than I am to myself. I dedicate myself to thee, O Lord.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
If that was amateur, I'd hate to see something professional.
Oh, no. Like I said, I took from other places, so.
Joel does. He does beautiful work like that. You must have taken lessons from him. But you were going to tell us, I'd like to know what brought you to Fort Walton Beach and a little, where do you meet? And do you meet like every Sunday? Or and what do you talk about? If you don't have one preacher who speaks.
Okay. I actually live in Pensacola. But there is a community here in Fort Walton Beach. I think it's a few individuals, but right now the communities in Northwest Florida, we aren't a large community, so we meet in each other's homes. For now, we don't have centers, but the larger communities, they're able to get a center and they meet regularly. We have sometimes some communities have devotional gatherings where they meet. And each community decides it for themselves because they meet and they consult. That process of consultation and deciding is left up to each individual community. So each community is different. So I'm not sure about the activities here in Fort Walton. But I know in Pensacola we have every 19 days we get together and meet. But then we also have some devotions and we also have some socials that we get together.
Why 19?
The Baha'i calendar is, Baha'u'llah chose to take the Gregorian calendar, i.e. the 365 days. I'm sure other calendars follow the moon, but Baha'u'llah chose the lunar calendar, I should say. And he broke it up into 19 months of 19 days each. And, but then that left 4 or 5 days, 5 days if it was a leap year, and which he converted into a special holiday called a Yamiha. So that's why the 19. So once every 19 days we get together and discuss, as a community and pray and socialize.
But what brought you to Pensacola?
Good question. When my husband and I met in Israel, and we were both serving at the Baha'u'llah Center. I worked in the audiovisual department where I cataloged photographs all day, every day. Loved it, but historical photos, local photos. But he's an electrician by trade, and so he worked in what's called the works department there, and he helped maintain a lot of the buildings, a lot of the Baha'is where they lived, their homes and stuff. And when we were talking about leaving, we were talking about different places, and we mentioned coming to the United States, and his boss said, if you're going to go to the United States, you got to go work for Jillian McQueen. I guess Jillian owns a couple of the hotels down at Pensacola Beach, and some others out in he owned one in Birmingham for a while, and several hotels. So he put us in touch with him, and he got him a job. So that's mundane. Had to find work.
Do you have green cards or what?
Because on my mother's side, I'm American citizen. My mother German immigrants from the 1600s. So on my mother's side, no, I was born in Kenya, but through my mother, I automatically gained citizenship because I was an American born abroad. I have no. I had, as far as Kenya was concerned, I had to choose by the time I was 18. But I was in college in New Mexico, and if I chose Kenyan citizenship.
Oh, yeah, tuition is
Exactly. So, you know.
And what do you do? Do you mind if I ask?
No, I don't mind. No, I work full time. I work for a small manufacturing firm. They make little electrical connectors, millions and millions of them, and I do purchasing for the company.
How old are your girls?
My oldest is 10, going on 11. She'll be 11 in May, and I have a 3-year-old going on 20. No, going on.
You're lucky the 10 isn't.
I know, but my 3-year-old. People think she's 5 or 6. They're beautiful. I wish I did.
Wonderful representative.
Oh, thank you.
You're very well spoken.
Thank you.
How did you end up in Israel?
When I was living in Albuquerque, I became a Baha'i. I decided to join the Baha'i faith when I was in Albuquerque. And several years after that, a gentleman came from the Baha'i World Center and talked about how they were looking for people to go and serve in Israel. And my heart just, well, I would love to do that, but I knew it was the work of God and so it was His will, not mine. So I prayed about it. And I applied, and I was told not yet. So I let it go. And then I went to Korea. And when I was in Korea, I was teaching English, but I went and met up with the Baha'is in Korea, and helped them with their activities. And one of my friends, I met this lady. I was talking with the gentleman here that we had formed a group and traveled to China. It was a dance group, and we were 14 individuals representing. We were 14. At least we represented 14 different countries, and I represented Kenya. But one of my friends that we got to know, she was from, and her mother was in Israel, working there, and she encouraged me to apply to go serve. And I said, well, I've already applied. And she said, no, apply. And so I did, and then at that point they accepted me to go. So that's why I went there.
What languages do you speak?
Fluently English, I understand Swahili because I grew up with it around me. I studied Korean. In school I studied French, but I say English fluent. Other languages, I start mixing them all up because I've traveled so much. I've been in China and Russia. I start putting Spanish words with Hebrew words with French, and so.
Certainly well spoken.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
The Baha'i faith is obviously very, very new, one of the newest ones probably in the world.
Yes.
And it seems to be spreading all over the world.
Yes.
But yet probably a lot of us haven't heard of it.
Yes.
How is its growth rate? Is it growing?
It's definitely growing. It's right at this moment. I mean, it's not growing by the tens of thousands, but it's definitely growing. And one of the things is Baha'is, we're not converting anybody. We're not going out there and I wouldn't even say as a former Catholic, because I don't believe that I have let go of Christ. In fact, I believe that I love Him more than I ever did before as a Baha'i now. We don't proselytize in that sense. We find people who are interested, and we're finding people who are already believing a lot of these things, because it's like it's like the sun. When the sun rises in the morning, the whole world feels the impact, even though we may not say, okay, that's the source of this light, or that's the source of the warmth that's coming into the world. We may not necessarily turn to the sun in the morning, but everybody's being impacted by it. So it's growing, and much like any other religion, takes time,
growing world religion. I've heard it's Buddhism.
Heard it was right there.
Buddhism.
Is it Islam?
I heard it
think it
was.
is.
Thank you for your help. Well, thank you again.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. You guys were a great group. Thank you.
Stop reading.
Yay. Oh, one last thing before you forget. I forgot. I brought these as well.
Okay. So I'd like one of these.
Yeah, so whoever would like one.
Okay.
You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.